Good morning and welcome back if you worshiped with us at 9, and welcome for the first time if you're just joining us before 11 o'clock worship. We're excited that Katie Meek is here. She's going to be sharing about her mission work, and during this time you'll have a chance to ask questions, learn more about the work and what she does. So if you're online, you can put your questions in the chat, and Jeff and I will be monitoring that, and we'll read them here in the space so they can be answered. And if you're here in the space, whenever... Are we going to have a specific Q&A time or just ask? Okay. So when we have Q&A time, I'll make sure that I've got a microphone so that you can ask your question in a way that the people online will be able to hear it. So with that, Katie, welcome back. We're excited to hear from you.
Thanks for having me back. I have a little bit more detail to share with you and kind of somewhat of an analysis as I see it of some of the challenges in Sierra Leone as well as what we're doing at the university for that. So I'm going to get into it. It's about a 20-minute presentation. And then when you have questions, we'll have, 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions and things like that. You can ask me all kinds of things, including about my dress. I can tell you about how it's one of a kind and made only for me if you want at some point. So let's get started. My name is Reverend Katie Meek. I'm a global ministries missionary. And I served in Sierra Leone for 6 years. Hi. And I served in Sierra Leone for 6 years and just came home in August. And now I am serving as a mission advocate to the North Central jurisdiction in the upper Midwest. But most of what I'm going to be talking about is my time in Sierra Leone, mostly just because I'm still getting onboarded to the new job. So a little bit about me. I'm from the Central Texas Conference. I served in Round Rock for 6 years. I was a pastor for 10 years before I became a missionary, and I've been in ministry 20-something years. I've stopped counting specifically now. I became a missionary in 2017, and my favorite things include teaching and preaching. Those are my favorite things, teaching and preaching. I really love podcasts. I'm an aunt. I have 2 African kitties who live with me outside of Denton, Texas now, and really missed blueberries and queso, but a Sierra Leonean beach is also one of my favorite things as well. So I served in Sierra Leone. You'll see it on the map there. If you look at the map of Africa, it's the red dot over there on the edge. And then I lived in Freetown, which is right on the coast, for 6 years. So Sierra Leone is a West African country. Population, I think, is probably more about 8 million now. It's the size of South Carolina. Texas is 9 times the size of Sierra Leone. And the capital is Freetown, and it's named Freetown because it was established in the 1800s as a return post for former enslaved people called the Creoles. Ask me more about that if there's time. It borders Guinea and Liberia. Life expectancy is very young, it's 52, and it's known for its very beautiful beaches. So Sierra Leone is known to be a very vibrant country. We love food, we love dancing, we love fashion, we love, a lot of color. So that's one thing. The next slide will show you a little bit. They're big on hospitality and belonging as well. There's a lot of, we wear the same fabrics to show that we belong to one another. There's, if you notice that there's just a sense of belonging is the word. They really gave me belonging, and it felt really special. And then they're also a very resilient people. They've had a lot of, the Blood Diamond conflict was there in Sierra Leone. They had what they called a civil war. Really, it was more like armed madmen terrorizing the country over the course of about 12 years. But they're a very resilient people and a very joyful people. So I served at the United Methodist University of Sierra Leone in Freetown, and I served specifically at the Bishop Benner School of Theology. For the whole 6 years, I served as a lecturer at the school, and I also served as the senior deputy registrar for the last 3 years of the university itself. So as a lecturer, I taught Christian history, I taught homiletics, which was my favorite. In fact, I'm going tomorrow to Sierra Leone. I'm flying out from Dallas tomorrow evening, and I'll be teaching homiletics as well as one other course while I'm there for a short time as a visiting lecturer. I taught Wesleyan history and doctrine. I taught systematic theology, which is also my favorite. I say every time I teach one of them, I'm like, this is my favorite. And then as the senior deputy registrar, I was in higher administration. I helped with visioning, I helped with fundraising, I helped with student enrollment exams, all the things that a registrar does, I did. Organizing events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But thank God I was the deputy, not the registrar. So I... Just sort of broad strokes of the university. We started in 2017. This is the first class of students, all men, and you can ask me a question about the women at the end as well, because there are women in our courses, and I'll introduce you to a few of them. But we started in 2017 with the School of Theology. The school is up on the highest mountain in Freetown, called Lester Peak. And we did that on purpose as sort of symbolically and physically for our young pastors to be studying on the mountaintop, right? To go away from the noise and everything and go and take time to study. So we held our inauguration in 2018, in January of 2018. It is the Bishop Venner School of Theology. That is Rosemary Venner. She is a retired bishop from Germany, and the German church helped us to build the building. And that is Bishop John K. Yambasu, who was the bishop in Sierra Leone, and he's the founder of the university. In 2019, we began a distance theological education program to train young pastors across the country. Many of our pastors have full-time jobs, they have families. They can't just take 4 years to come to Freetown and study. So we took school to them. So every August and January we did that. In 2020, we opened the School of Transformative Education to train teachers. In 2021, we opened the School of Business and Entrepreneurial Studies. And in 2022, we held our very first graduation ceremony, where I think we have pictures of it. Yeah, 7 students graduated with a degree in theology, 7 received a certificate in chaplaincy, and then 18 received a postgraduate diploma in education. That was our first graduation ceremony, and we are moving toward the second. And one of our students has finished his master's degree at the school at Africa University in Zimbabwe, and the plan is he will come back and teach at our university. So he'll be one of the leaders at the School of Theology. And then these 4 young men were commissioned as provisional elders. They are 4 of our graduates and were commissioned last year as provisional elders. They're all serving churches. And let me tell you, there's one of those, I won't tell you which one, that I did not have high hopes for, I'll tell you. And then I went and visited them before I left, and the way that he just embodied his pastoral authority, and the way that he had matured into the role. I was so proud, because I was a little bit like, I don't know about this one, but I was so proud of him. He was, let me tell you, my friend was like, you should tell him. I still haven't told him, but anyway, so we watched them grow. And this was last January 2023. It's not all of our students, but it is most of the full-time and the part-time together, as well as our faculty and staff. So we've grown from 7 to this over the course of the time we were there. And this year, I think that they may have doubled their full-time students as well. So when I've done this presentation before to talk about some of the challenges that we had in Sierra Leone, that they have in Sierra Leone, I had all of these like sort of sophisticated analyses of what was going on in Sierra Leone and why they're the 3rd poorest country in the world. They had the lowest maternal mortality, well, the highest maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate. They've really struggled over a generation or two. And I had all these analyses about why. But what I have come to believe is all the problems in Sierra Leone go back to the fact that they are very poor. It just goes back to poverty. And there are a lot of reasons that we could get into. But I find that if they didn't struggle with resources, they wouldn't have these problems. And from my perspective. So just to give you an idea, when I arrived in Sierra Leone, $1 was the equivalent of 7,500 leones. which is a little bit hard to wrap your head around, right? $1 was the equivalent of 7,500 leones. Now, $1 is the equivalent of 24,000 leones. It's been 6.5 years, right? So inflation has just absolutely wrecked them. And even back then, some people at that time were making the equivalent of $30 a month. They're still making that same amount, but now it's the equivalent of about 12, you know. When I arrived there, fuel was $3,000 leones per liter. Now it's 30,000 leones per liter. A cup of rice back then was 1,000 leones, and now it is 11,000 leones for the cheap stuff. And rice is their staple food. So just to give you an idea of what they're facing, of sort of what they're facing. And what I have found is that poverty, there is an inertia to poverty. It's hard to live in it because then you start to get pulled in, right? You start to just feel like nothing is ever going to change, so why do I even try, right? There's a lot of people who are studying the idea, like what we might call laziness, and there's now a lot of work to say that there's no such thing as laziness. It's actually the outside in the outside conditions that produce that sort of psychological response to say, why do I even try? Because all of my efforts will be for naught, right? So poverty has this inertia, and you stop believing and you stop hoping. And then because of poverty, the other piece of poverty is that your moral compass starts to falter. Right? Because I'm hungry and I need some food. I work today to eat today, and if today was a bad day, then I got to find something, I got to do something, and then you start to see corruption around you, and then you start to think, well, everybody's doing it, right? So that's where sort of corruption comes in, right? And then it just snowballs. That's been my experience living in a very poor country. And if people had enough, there wouldn't be the moral compromises any more than there are moral compromises here, right? People would behave differently because they would have hope that things might be different, right? So that's the challenge that we're facing. And that's the challenge that the university sort of like walked into and intentionally is trying to push against, right? What poverty does to people. So this is what we're doing at the university. The number one thing is this idea the world needs your voice. What I did in my classroom and what we are doing in our classrooms is building confidence in themselves, right? The other piece that I used to talk about, that I'll talk about here, is that colonization does a thing to your brain as well, wherein you start to think, well, my people aren't as great as those people, so we don't have anything to offer, right? But in my classroom in Sierra Leone, I had 2 classroom values. Every day I would go up to the board and I would write my 2 classroom values. The first one was, the details matter. So please make your subject and your verb agree, for goodness sake, right? That's number 1. Number 2, the world needs your voice. The idea being that they actually have been given something by God that other people don't have. They have the capacity to solve their own problems. They don't need somebody to come in and save them, right? Except by the grace of God, that they might stand up on their own 2 feet, right? So one thing that we do is building confidence, the world needs their voice. And what happened is they started to parrot that back to me. Because I did it for 6 years, I did it every day. The world needs your voice, the world needs your voice, the world needs your voice. And then they started to say that to me. And they would say it to me about themselves, right? So that's number 1. The second one is this strong, empowering Wesleyan theology, specifically Wesleyan theology. From a Wesleyan perspective, we believe that God cares not only about the soul, but also the body, right? This church knows this very well. I know you're a very socially active church, right? You know that God calls us to transform the world, not only through spirit, but also in the physical realm, right? And so one of the things that we taught them on the theology side is that God cares about the poverty that they are experiencing, and it is an enemy of God. right? And God calls us to fight against it, to stand firm against it. It is one of the powers and principalities of the world, all right? And God calls us to resist and to stand firm against it. So this idea that God is on their side and that God has not done this to them, right? But rather, or called them to it or whatever, this is not their lot in life because God's forgotten them. But the opposite. In fact, God grows closer to the poor, right? And so we talk about education, we talk about, body health and abundant health and all kinds of different things. So that was number 2. And then number 3, we have, this is our motto, excellence, integrity, and service. Our vice chancellor called them our watchwords. So we had these, it wasn't just head knowledge, it was also character building, spiritual training, discipleship that we were doing at the university. And it wasn't just the School of Theology that learned these things. This was something that was across all of our schools as well. I don't know who came up with these words, but I showed up there and I was like, these are the exact words. This is everything, right? That we would show up and work hard and do things with excellence. We don't cut corners, even though it's easier and we want to, right? Because nothing matters. That's what oftentimes goes through their heads, right? We don't cut corners. We do things to the best of our ability. We do it with integrity, which means we push against corruption, even if it means that we have to make sacrifices for it. And we don't do it for ourselves, we do it in service to others. So they're being trained that they might lead and serve a community so that hopefully we can start essentially building up the church toward these values as well, strengthening the church, and then that by that strengthening the society. That's the idea, and that's what the United Methodist University, Sierra Leone was started to do. That's the push that we've been sort of doing for the last 6 years. So I want to give you some examples. This young man, his name is Mohamed Lansana. We called him Medlans because, so he converted. He lived out in the provinces. He lived sort of out in a little village and was born a different religion and converted to Christianity. And you know why he converted to Christianity? He said because the Methodist school in town, they fed not only their own people, but they fed their neighbors. They had like a food program. And he said those Christians, they care about other people. And I wanted to be a part of that. So he had converted not too long before, and I had a bishop one time who said that new Christians are sort of like puppies, right? You sort of have to follow them around and be like, no, don't do that, no, don't do that. And he was very much that way. He was the strong, good-looking guy who would walk into a room with great authority and as though he sort of knew everything, but he would spout heresy, not only in our classroom, but in the pulpit sometimes, right? So you'd have to just be like, no, come back, pull it back, pull it back, pull it back. So the first time he preached, we gave him a very hard time. At one point, one of the professors was sitting, he's preaching here, and one of the professors, and he said something particularly egregious. And one of the professors goes, right in the middle of his sermon, like, no, we gave him a real hard time. So you sort of had to pull him back a little bit. But the thing about it is when he preached, the whole world, faded. He had, this true prophetic voice that you sort of wanted to rein in, and that's what we were doing in the classroom, right? But when he got up to preach, it was like, oh, this is the Holy Spirit. So it was his third sermon, I think, maybe. And he was doing this, he was walking around, and I started to notice that his hands were shaking. We did chapel every Wednesday, and we had the students preach. So this was at chapel. And I started to notice that his hands were shaking as he was preaching. And he'd get on, and his hands would shake. And it was powerful what he was saying, but his hands were going like this. And so I went up to him after he preached, and I said, Medlans, I noticed your hands are shaking, because I'm thinking he's nervous. So I was going to give him some tips because I was the preaching lecturer. So I'm thinking he's nervous. And I said, I noticed your hands are shaking. Are you nervous? And he said, oh, no, I'm not nervous. He said, I just feel so overcome by the Holy Spirit when I get up to preach that my body shakes with the power of the Holy Spirit. So I hope you're starting to see the idea. We're having these students come up before us. We're giving them feedback. We're giving them all of this, and and in the classroom, we're calling them toward a really positive theology, not one about hellfire and damnation, which he really liked. We didn't. So we had a lot of conversations about who goes to hell and who doesn't. But what we're giving him this sort of theology of grace, this very well-founded theology, so that then when he gets up to preach, that Holy Spirit fire and power, he can become a prophetic voice into the community, right? So you get the idea what we're doing. One more student I want to introduce you to. This is Augusta Carew. She is the granddaughter of the first indigenous bishop in Sierra Leone. His son, the first indigenous bishop of Sierra Leone, his son is a man named George Carew. He is the premier postmodern philosopher in Sierra Leone, and he was the founding vice chancellor of the United Methodist University. And I call him my Sierra Leonean dad. And then this is his niece, Augusta Carew. And when she showed up in my preaching class. She's part of the distance program. She's older. She's already an elder in the community. People already respect her. She's already preaching. Here's the thing. She showed up to preach in my preaching class, and she stopped preaching, and I was like, I have no notes. Everything she did was right, and you should do what she did, right? I mean, it was just like she already had everything. And so essentially what we were doing is building her up, like allowing her to be an example to the other students of what quality looks like, right? She already had the leadership. She already had all of the things. But at the same time, we are building her up. We're also giving her more authority in the society because now she has a degree, right? So she'll come to the other side and say, I've been trained toward this, I've been, right? So what we're seeing is these people who already have the Spirit of God, who have already been equipped, whose voices the world needs, right? And strengthening them toward the ministry. So, that's it. We can talk about how you can help. I can talk about missionary stuff. If you want. I am still a missionary. In fact, we'll go through this real quickly just so you know. I think it's educational. As missionaries, we raise our own money, and it's $25,000 a year that we are asked to raise. At the university as well, you can give here this is. We're United Methodist, so you know these things. 85 cents, when you give $1 on Sunday morning, 85 cents goes to the local church, 6 cents goes to benevolent giving and second mile giving, which is me, which is missionaries, which is mission across the world, all of that. 2 cents goes to the general apportionments, and 7 cents goes to the jurisdiction, annual conference, and districts, right? So every time you give on Sunday morning, 2% of that goes on to support missionaries. This is how much a missionary costs, according to Global Ministries maybe a couple of years ago, something like that. I don't get all that money. Unfortunately, that's how much we cost for all the things. I had to have security. I had to have, I have good health care, all of that. And then if you want to go to the next one of the things, this is what I want to talk about because I love it. One of the values of Global Ministries is that we send missionaries from everywhere to everywhere, which used to be a missionary was a white person, someone who looked like me, from the West, right, who was sent to the global South, to people who look very different, right? But in the same way that I tell my students the world needs your voice, Global Ministries came to the point where we started to push back against this idea that God only calls Westerners to missionary service, right? That in fact, God calls all people to be in mission together. And so, but the issue is, this is the class of missionaries we all look young and spry, and I've got older. If you go back, this is the class of missionaries that I was commissioned with. 2 of us are from Texas. The 2 girls that look like we're from Texas are from Texas. And then 3 of them are from Africa, 2 of them are from the Philippines, 2 of them are from Zimbabwe, and 1 of them is from Mozambique. And the pastors in Zimbabwe make $13 a month. One of my missionary colleagues in Sierra Leone is a pastor from Zimbabwe, $13 a month. They could not raise $25,000 from the churches in Zimbabwe, right? So what ends up happening, and they come here, and so I would request that you host a missionary that is not American, because you'll get a different kind of blessing from them. And so they come here and they itinerate in the same way that we do, but at the same time, those of us with connections, what ends up happening is you give to me anything over that 20, really it just goes into a big pot that supports all the missionaries. So that those of us who have those connections can then essentially support us living into this idea from everywhere to everywhere. So when you give to a missionary, it supports all the missionaries so that God can call all the voices that are needed to go, right? So that's the idea. That's that's one of my favorite things about global ministries. So very quickly, I am now the mission advocate of the North Central Jurisdiction. This is the mission advocate team. We all met up in Georgia, and we walked the Chattahoochee. Y'all know that song, way down yonder on the Chattahoochee. I couldn't get it out of my head. So one morning for this meeting, we went and walked. This is our group. So I'm about to move to Chicago probably, and I'm a missionary to the upper Midwest now. And you can ask me questions about that too. So I'm still a missionary, and I'm still able to, like I said, I'm going to Sierra Leone tomorrow. I keep the relationship with Sierra Leone. I'm still a visiting lecturer there, and still doing the work. This is my website. You can go there. I have a blog, and I'm working on doing some more sort of public theology as I go. It's postmodernmissionary.com. And then if you want to go to the next one, postmodernmissionary.com, and that's my advance number as well. And there's a QR code that maybe we can put up while you're asking me questions in case you want to access where you can give. If you want to be in continued partnership with me. Like I said, if you give to me, it goes across the world to all the other missionaries too. So that's it. That was a lot in a very short amount of time. I have a question already. Oh, the gay rights question.
So I'm assuming that the culture in which Sierra Leone is much more anti-gay rights.
Yes.
So tell us about gay rights and how you encounter it in the United Methodist Church and the whole issue, if you could. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So Bishop Yambasu was the midwife for the protocol. If you remember, a couple of years ago, after the 2019, the terrible annual general conference of 2019, where it looked like we were about to split and all the bad things, Bishop Yambasu said, we need to get everybody in a room and figure this out. And other bishops questioned him. They were like, what gives you the authority to come to America and put us all in a room and figure this out? And Bishop Yambasu said, by discipline, if I'm a bishop anywhere, I'm a bishop everywhere, and I have authority to do this. He was a really amazing man. He died very suddenly in 2020 of a car accident. It was devastating for everybody involved. So his perspective was that this is a cultural issue that we do not fully understand. Right? That was his perspective. And that's how he led through it. I would say that most Sierra Leoneans are their mindset is not even like, it's sort of like, what? That's sort of how most Sierra Leoneans feel about it. It's just so not even really completely on the radar for them that it would be even a justice issue. And most people are more traditionalist. I would say almost everybody's more traditionalist there. However, my experience of Sierra Leoneans is they care more about the relationship than they do the rule. And so there is known homosexuality, and there are known people in their congregations who may not have the same, they just don't have the same, this is our identity, like Americans, like Westerners sort of feel. Does that make sense?
So they're all kind of still in closet, is what you're saying. That's what I'm hearing you say.
No.
The gays are in the closet in Sierra Leone.
No, I wouldn't say that.
What did you
I wouldn't
didn't
say that.
understand what you said.
I would say that there is no closet there because they don't really see it in the same way. They see it as an expression of sexuality and that's it, right? They don't see it as a personal identity.
Gay couples are accepted in the Methodist Church there without any problem. Openly.
Also no. Also no. Also no.
I'm still confused.
Well, I don't want to, it's nuanced, right? So I don't want to go I don't want to get too far into it, but I don't want to give you a black or white answer because there is none, right? So we had these conversations in my classroom. I always tried to be very respectful of not coming in with my sort of Western perspective and pushing it on them. But most of the conversations we did have were about whether or not God's grace is big enough to welcome all people. And most people would agree with that, right? And oftentimes when I'd push them, they'd be like, but wait a second. And then I'd be like, is God's grace big enough to welcome? Well, yes, but, So those were the conversations that we were having. But I would say if you ask them point blank, they would say, no, it is sin.
Gay is not good.
Right.
Gay is not acceptable.
Yeah.
That's the general culture.
Yeah, I would say that.
But they don't have the laws in place like Uganda has passed.
No, I do not believe that they have any officially anti-gay laws. I don't believe. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Katie. I want to bounce off of Mark's question, and I wonder whether or not when you said the age of 52 of life expectancy, and I kind of wonder whether or not, when you're at that level of poverty, I mean, your whole being is trying to sustain yourself when you're in poverty, and whether or not things like gender identity and all of those kind of things are just not as important as it is trying to put enough food on your table for your family. And maybe that's part of all of this.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I would love to hear your
Yeah.
and is the age of 52, is that an issue of poverty and health care?
Yes, the age of 52 is an issue of poverty, 100%.
Right.
The water is not clean, and not everybody can afford to buy good water. And even some of the good water that's cheap is not really good water, right? So from the beginning, you've got a health issue there. Malaria also is it kills children under 5. If you make it to 5 there, you will probably survive malaria until you are old. But if you get malaria under 5, there will be a question as to whether or not you'll survive it. So yes, the life expectancy is about poverty. I appreciate that. I do think in some ways what we are experiencing is because here, in terms of the growth of the LGBTQ plus community, has to do with the privilege of stability. Yeah, but I don't want to say that wholeheartedly because I think we have to be careful not to put our values on them. And to say, well, they will automatically, if they were this, this, and this, then they would automatically agree with us, right? We're all in 2024. We're in 2024, right? Right? We're all in 2024 together. They're not behind us in any way, right? So I want to say that as well. So I think oftentimes I used to hold this idea that, well, if once they learn, then they'll agree with me. Right? They probably think the same thing. Once you learn, you would agree with me, right? So we have to be careful about that. So, any other questions?
Comment a little bit, just because I'm interested of huge influx in the library in Sierra Leone from black folks from this country, and especially the Caribbean. I'm more interested. Any influence do you see from Afro-Caribbean influence in West Africa?
Oh, Afro-Caribbean influence in West Africa, 100%. So I watched it was like a cooking show or something that was in St. Martin or something like that, and I was like, oh, that's Sierra Leone. The Caribbean is very similar. And the history there, I don't want to get too far into it. You should Google it. It's really interesting. There's a tribe in Sierra Leone called the Creoles. That tribe were actually returned from the Americas to Sierra Leone. It was founded as a return post called Freetown, right? And they came with this language called Creole. It is the language now everyone speaks in Sierra Leone, but it was formed in the Americas.
It's a mix of English, Spanish, and
Yes, English, French, okay, Yoruba, which is a Nigerian language, French, English, Portuguese, and then a mix all together. Do you want to learn some? Yes. Okay, so if you want to greet somebody, you would say couche, right? And then the general greeting is howdy body, which means house, literally how's the body, right? Howdy body, right? And you would either say, the body fine, which means the body is fine. Or you would say, I tell God thank you, which means I tell God thank you. You hear it? I tell God thank you. Right? They also say, beaucoup, beaucoup, thank you, beaucoup, right? So they've got that French in there as well. It's very fun. It's very fun. Other questions? What? You have to call time? Sorry. The both of you standing up. I just ignored you. I'm like, more questions.
Thank you, Katie. This is such a blessing, and I have followed this postmodern missionary for since she started. I got here in this district, got to know her a little bit, and then she left, and it's been just a joy following you through all these years. And Katie will be around for any questions if you want to have a little bit time to visit with her. The band's going to need to warm up, so that conversation might be better happening on the other side of glass doors.
That's great.
So thank you all for being here, and thank you for those who have joined us online. Blessings to you all.
Yeah, God bless you. Thank you.